I sit here as a non-artist. I sit on the other side of the table. I was invited to participate on the panel, not because I'm an artist or an art maker, but because I'm a collector. A consumer, a viewer, one of those who complete the process that artists begin. I've been looking at art and artists for a long, long time. Closing the circle of call and response and looking at what they have produced. I've come to believe that art always reveals something about its creator. It also works to help us explore ourselves. I believe all art is in part self-portrait, in part observation and commentary. Exploring art has come to feel like one of the basic components of a fully human life. COVID has limited all of us from moving freely, going to museums, going to galleries, and being in dialogue with art and artists has been one of the challenges that we must face, makers and viewers alike. Artists are constrained in other ways, and their practice over recent years must necessarily reflect the times that they are moving through. They live not only with the rhythms and tides of their particular lives, but also with the kind of global climate shift that events like COVID or AIDS bring with them. While most of us are trying to get back to normal, some recognize that we are on a one-way ride. We are not going back. And so we look to artists to help us illuminate the path forward. Locked in the COVID cave, some artists have a burst of productivity while others find the constraints deplete their creative impulse. We are at an intersection where creativity, COVID, and the ongoing issues that impact the status of African American artists are all combining. They affect both the process and the product of what artists produce and how we see it and how we are allowed to see it. I'm delighted to be here today with 4 compelling artists. 3 of them are old friends and one a new friend. All of them are doing exciting work. I look forward to hearing from them about how and why they continue to make their work. Each of them can share with us how COVID has shaped their products. For the exhibition that they mentioned, In Search of Missing Masters, I wrote an essay called Constructing Identity. And that would seem to reflect the task that artists take on. The recreation of the world they see. They must, as Rena Banerjee put it, make me a summary of the world before they can create images that will be able to hold our gaze. My fellow panelists are each involved in the work of creating objects that present some reflections from their essence for review. Ideas that mingle in a space that exists somewhere between prayer and propaganda. In that world between dream, magic, and mystery, they distill and transform insight into content that we can look to find meaning. So with that having said, I'll turn it over to the first panelist, Adama, and thank you for your time and attention to them.
Right here? Yeah. Okay. So, hi, my name is Adama Delphine Fawundu. Hello? Oh, okay. I'm Adama Delphine Fawundu. And yeah, so I guess I'll share a little bit about just this, what it was like what 2020 was like, and why I felt that it was really important to keep making art. But even before getting to that, I just remember questioning everything, right? Like, what is really important at this moment? And even just the brief fear that we were at a point, you know, I was one of those people who, many years ago, I would make like jokes with my kids and say, tell your kids, do not take the chip. chip in the brain that's going to have you inside of a computer, right? And when we were at that, right then, I was like, oh my God, this is when everyone is going to be hooked to their phones and inside of this computer, and this is real, like this is happening right now. Also, some of the issues that I deal with in my work, I am thinking about the environment, I'm thinking about humanity, I'm thinking about our futures, all of the things that I've been thinking about. It just felt like they were so important at that moment. And so as I was making work, I'm always with the ancestors while I'm making work, and it just really, everything was just so, I don't even know how to explain it, but everything just felt so necessary to engage in. Like I had to create work. I don't know how, I think that's the only thing that kept me from just like completely losing it, was having this outlet to just create, to talk, to spend time with family, but just be in the moment of reflection, to make sure that I was also still thinking about the having an optimistic view of where we were going. One of the projects that I was working on at the time, it seemed like at the time, I had all of these deadlines. I had a show that was supposed to open in Germany. That was, everything had to go online, right? And then I had this thing at the Park Avenue Armory, which was I have a project called In the Face of History. And what I've been doing with that project is it's been transforming in different spaces. So it is a project that involves me going into the archives and finding documents that deal with global histories, particularly with emphasis of the Africa and the diaspora, and what's missing in the telling of history. So I amass all of these documents and screen print on top of it, and it's really, I use myself in my work often, so the screen print is the back of my head, but when you look at the print and you look at the document, it's almost like, is the document before, is the image within the document? It plays with time. So, and thinking shift in time, but I'm thinking about this idea of, what is the past, present, and the future? It's all in one, and it's constantly happening. And even this metaphysical relationship with how we understand history and how it impacts how we think about the future, and that's always changing. So I was commissioned by the Park Avenue Armory to create something that would, talk about this commemoration of women having the right to vote in America. And so my plan was to get all of these documents that particularly showed the contributions that women of color made to this, because that often gets left out, right? And so I had all of these documents, and in my view, I was gonna make a tapestry that would hang in the space and move, because I like to think about movement and space and energies and all of that. But then COVID happened, right? And we had to do everything, it had to be a digital project. So then I said to myself, I'm going to, instead of making something that hangs, and this has to be a digital thing, I'm going to record myself sewing a cape. And the name of the cape was the In the Face of History Freedom Cape. And I no longer had a studio to work with, so Prospect Park was my studio, in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. So I said, I'm going to take this cape and I'm going to perform it in the park, videotape that, and the whole thing would be the video that would, which will document me sewing. But the process of making, I always say, you see the end product, but like for me, the most important part is the making of it. So hand stitching, using my machine, just like constructing this cape, wearing the cape, embodying it, all of that, even moving in the cape was so important to me. Prospect Park in Brooklyn, New York is special to me because I grew up in the neighborhood, and that park holds memories of my childhood. But then even on a larger scale, Prospect Park is historical. It was a plantation. The Lefferts house was there, and the Lefferts did own enslaved people. So I was interacting with the park as an archive, me making this cape as an archival material, and then photographing and videotaping myself, thinking about how do I embody memory, and what do the trees remember, what do the grass, what does the wind remember? And through the performance of this cape, you could see the cape moving and the body moving. And so in the book, there is a photograph of me in front of the Lefferts house, and then there's a video that accompanies that. Another piece in the book is during 2020, again, I was asked to be a part of a project in Amsterdam, and it was called Radical Spaces. So I decided to go ahead and start doing a deep dive on some of the histories that we don't hear about in Amsterdam as well, and used those documents and kind of did the same thing. And I didn't get to see it. Sometimes the work travels to places that you don't get to go to.
Get jealous of your work.
I'm like, I want to go too, but they did a whole outdoor exhibition with it, and, they did many, many activations, which was really exciting. But yeah, so for me, it was really about using whatever space that I could to be my studio space. Being in the park and being with the environment was also a lifesaver. Having the opportunity to act with nature, and it made me start to think about what is the radical imagination? How do we imagine outside of the confinements that we are meant to, like the things that we're supposed to think about? And that's where I am now, like really thinking about how to imagine outside of these boxes that, we've been placed in.
Before you pass on, technology was also a big part of this,
Oh,
which
yes.
we did not see. So you're performing in the park, but you could put it on Instagram.
Yes.
How did that affect?
I know.
How did that affect your thinking during that time?
So it's interesting. You're just talking about technology. All right, so normally when I'm doing these projects, especially filming in the park, I would have an assistant working with me. And guess who my assistant was? My, at the time, 77-year-old mom. So on our walk, we walked to the park, and I'm like, Mom, are you gonna help me? And she was so excited. And as I'm moving, she's like, oh my gosh, Adama, you have to see this. Because we're going back and forth. But yeah, so yes, Instagram was also this thing, right, that we were communicating with, and sharing some of the work there, and we were stuck in that world. But I will say this: telephone conversations with you, with Barrett, honestly, those were definitely lifesavers for me, right? The actual physical hearing a voice on the phone and having a long conversation.
About nothing.
Those meant everything. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Syd Carpenter, and listening to her talk about all of these different locations is what really resonates for me, because location actually was a key to my ability, or at least the fortunate circumstances that I was able to experience during that time. And the locations that I'm identifying have to do with, I was very fortunate that I lived in the place where my studio was, the interior space, which was very large. And then I also lived a half block from several gardens that I do. So I was able to not only make objects freely, productively, without any kind of obstacles during that time, and then be in the outdoors and continue that process. So why is that so vital to me? Because another thing besides location is another L word, and it's land. Mm-hmm. To me, that is fundamental to my sense of identity as a woman, as a Black woman, as a person on this planet, the connections to my community. It's all is involved with my location on the land and my ability to identify with that deeply. So that comes from legacy, another L word. And that legacy comes from knowing that my family has a history on the land. And immediately so, because my mother, and I have to talk a little bit more about my mother, because she also has been a big part of content from my work. But my mother was a master gardener. I just have these images of her being in her garden and me reluctantly accompanying her into these spaces where she was most creative and most regal and I'm going to use that word because when she was in her garden, she was the queen of that space and seemed to have this ability to communicate with those things that she was growing. And everything grew. It was all beautiful. And so her mother, before her, was also a master gardener in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she had one of those victory gardens on a very, very busy corner in Pittsburgh, where she was able to produce all of this food for her family of 7 kids and to be able to share it with neighbors. And it became a pretty well-known garden. And a couple years ago, I was able to go back and find it. And it's still a garden. You know, the view that she had on a hill looking down onto the Monongahela River was still the same view. And the fact that it was still a garden. So making that circle and connection. And then the importance of land and legacy to our ability as a people to have agency. If you don't have land, if you don't have a home that you can identify as an origin place for you, you are adrift. You know, there is sorrow in that, I think. I think the importance of being able to locate geography that has your history in it, or to be able to create a space that you can begin history with. I think it's really important for parents to convey that idea about location and about home place to their children. So that's been really, really, really a vital and essential part of my sense of self as an artist, is my connection to the land. And of course, I started out, well, not of course, but I started out painting and then very, very quickly moved into working with clay. And not at that time being perceptive enough to get a sense of clay as my land, because that clay was my land. And I worked and worked and worked and hadn't really found ways of creating imagery or content around it other than just feeling at home when I was working in that material. And I feel right now that I'm really, really fortunate now that I get it. I'm old enough now to see where those links are, where those important connections were being made, and it was always about land. And so I've done a series of pieces in the last 20 years that are about making portraits of African American farmers in gardens, going south and finding what I refer to as legacy farms, farms that people have been on since Reconstruction and later. Of course, there was the Great Migration, and so many of us left the land because of the indignities and just the obstacles to being able to thrive. And so we went north and we went west, and that took courage. But there are those who stayed on their land, and they kept it, and they still have it, and they're passing it on to their children. And I have been able to make connections and visit those legacy farms, and to see the original house, the shed, the shack, next to the new modern split level and the infinity sitting out in front of it, and all of those kinds of things. But seeing that connection and seeing that growth, and coming back and being able to make a series of sculptures about that. And then, of course, going into the areas where we have settled, our neighborhoods, and finding that we didn't abandon our roots, our legacy as farmers. We have evolved. Some of the most forward-thinking farmers are Black farmers in the neighborhoods. Just this idea that we have brought that knowledge, brought that love of the land, brought that sense of stewardship to the land again, and passing that knowledge on. And so to me, that's exciting, and my work is so much about that. And I give thanks to my mom, because she is the person who, me not kicking and screaming, but not very enthusiastic about it, she left that internal connection to the land. She passed that on to me, and that's just something that got me through. I mean, I didn't feel as if I was in any kind of traumatic state because of COVID, only because I had my land and I could go out to it whenever I wanted to. And I had several gardens going at the same time. At the same time, I was making a series of sculptures about my mother called mother pins. The mother pins are actual clothespins. Well, they're clay clothespins, and each one represents her in some form of power, transition. Nurture. She's an emblem of a certain kind of spiritual ascendance. And I love the fact that I'm able to identify her in these different ways, the mother pin. I still have that bag of clothespins that she hung my clothes up on the line in the backyard in Pittsburgh. So I have those tangible things. But the mother pins are an offshoot of what I would see in the South, because when I was in the South looking for those legacy farms, there were all these objects and icons and artifacts that spoke to and described and just embodied that sense of time that being on the land always imparts to the person who is able to be there and have their roots sit down into that earth. So the roots are literal and the roots are figurative, but I feel as if I've been fortunate enough, having always grown up in the city, to feel that connection to land and to want to communicate that and tell folks how important it is to connect to that land.
All right.
Thank you, Syd. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for showing up. This is an incredible collection of the United Nations. My name is James Brantley. I've been around this town now for about 78 years.
What?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It don't crack. So I've seen a lot in this town. A lot has changed. They were the 60s when the doors opened. We were at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1963. And the influx of African Americans in that institution is unfounded even to today. I can name you artists today that made a difference in our dialogue that we're talking about now. From the Academy, in 1963, it's $365 a semester. And believe it or not, I couldn't afford the second semester. And the selective service in the United States military, they imposed that on Americans, mostly poor and middle class. And we were inducted, drafted into the military. And I went off to Vietnam in 1966, 65, 66. And I just had a flashback. The stuff, there are no helicopters over this. At any rate, so from that experience and learning how to speak Vietnamese, you know, to get along, and they would call African American soldiers, some of them would call us Mo Chok, and Mo Chok means monkey. Some of us were presented with pillows to rest our tails on. These were the tales that were told. They would use the N-word, and we were there as, you know, liberators, so to speak, from North Vietnam. So after that experience, coming back to the United States in 1967, we were billeted in Oklahoma, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where we were pitching tents for ROTC candidates. And we were out in the fields policing the highways, picking up trash. That's how they treated us. So coming back and being a Vietnam vet and all of that stuff, we weren't welcomed, very well. So after that was over, I continued my education here in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania Academy until 1971, and where I received a certificate and an incredible experience there. It's so invaluable that words can't express. It was a great time spending it with Cranston Walker and Richard Watson down on 3rd Street. Remember that, Richard? The Three Musketeers. And what an experience that was, to be fine artists. My main discipline is painting. Painting to me was a liberating experience. I do it now with a passion. The COVID, isolation it was nothing new for me. It was nothing new for a serious artist. We isolate anyway. It was like coming home. So that to me, and I still am isolated. I lost 130 pounds just recently. Sandy Webster, she passed away in October. Excuse me. So gone but not forgotten. She's here now.
Never, never, never.
So we spent a lot of time together with this lady here.
All of us.
Yeah, but we traveled with Glacier Shea. We went from Copenhagen to Brazil to Cuba. We just, New York, Texas, California. We just traveled all over the world. And Sandy was one of the main reasons why we organized as the group. And one of her sayings was, "Art saves lives," which is a Native American saying, but she adopted it and became her thing. And if you never had an experience of meeting her, you missed a lot. She was an amazing artist, a provider for artists' platforms. And she launched so many artist careers in museums and galleries all over the country and the world. I can tell you stories about how we celebrated in Cuba. It was just amazing. The restaurants, a lot of the people opened up their homes and we ate in their homes. It was great. If you get a chance to go to Cuba, I think it's still a wonderful place to visit. But today, I'm working as hard as ever. Grandkids, I just had a birthday. Grandkids are up. One is at, what's the one in Washington? Howard University. Yeah, she's graduating in this May. May is a big month for me because I've been awarded the Pennsylvania Academy Distinguished Artist Award. So I'll be there. Thank you. It's quite an honor. It's quite an honor. If you go over there now, you see one of my works, and it's standing right next to a painting of George Washington. And he has a cannon pointed right at me. and I'm dressed in a flag with my left hand over my heart, and it's draped. I did that painting in 1968 down on 3rd Street when we had the loft down there. Remember that, Rich? Yeah, and yes, and I remember Barclay Hendricks painted me the same year. That's the other painting there now. It's a red background. It calls it JSB. My middle name is Sherman, but he called it something else I can't reveal here. He was another very close friend, an incredible painter. His work sells for them in millions now, I believe. So it's quite a ride. It's not over. There's a lot to be said about living in the moment. I had a catalog Sandy and I produced back in the 80s. And Lewis, you did the forward. And I call it past, present, and future. Adama, I think you were saying something in that. Yeah. And it's an iconic catalog. I put it right next to an old master painter, and they blend. It's weird. It's weird. It's Turner. His paintings and my paintings were very similar. So it wasn't intentional. It just happened. So thanks again for showing up. It's not easy. Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to ask you to hold this in a minute, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, all right. Hello, everyone. Not sure where to follow up there, but I'll try to make it as quick as possible because I'm sure Lewis has got some questions, and I'm sure you guys have some as well. I just want to pick up the stick and the tradition of the past, present, and future. And in terms of identity, it's a word that gets misused these days, along with terms like CRT, and along with other codified terms that are basically just racist, so we can move on. So let's talk about why I think this book is important, these people that are gathered here are important, and why you're here, and hopefully to discern and divine some things from us. So I am originally I was actually conceived in Birmingham, England, born and raised in Jamaica. I will not be giving you my life story, that's just the start. And I want to use that as a springboard to talk about three distinct things that I'd like you to carry with you, and that is, one, African Americans, a term that has become the standard after, I guess, Negro, colored, black, African American, right? Excuse me, we're not in the basement, son. No. African Americans, and then I want to talk about Africans in America, like Adama. Right? There are Africans in America. That's part of the composite of this country. It always has been, but that has always been relegated to black, which is fine. I'm not ashamed of the term black, but black is a term that's assigned. White is a term that's appropriated, and there's a difference. And then where are we going in the future? The past, present, the future. And I think the future is always now. The future is tomorrow. The future is right now, before I started the sentence. So what's that? Africans in the Americas is where I think we really are. And I think if you're going to walk out of this space and talk about some things that are really important in terms of connecting to where the culture is, what's important, especially in shifting time, I can't compete with that. Okay. So we're Africans in the Americas. So many people in this book, Morel Doucet, whose work is on the cover with Stephen Arbois, Erlin Jaffrard, Haitian American, Didier William also was at PAFA for a while, now is at Rutgers, is he? Yes, brilliant artists, are all bringing an aesthetic to contemporary African American art. That is a category where we're in, but it is part of our cultural heritage that we are people who represent the principle in design of economy, and that is doing the most with the least. Everything you think of as African American culture is a function of a diverse group of people who are extremely adept at doing the most with the least. And so I really would like to jump off from that, Africans in the Americas. It can't be, it never was just about black folk in America. It always was about the fact that Brazil had 6 times as many slaves as America. Why do they have a huge carnival? Because the white folks there were outnumbered and said, you know what, let them dance, whereas we had a puritanical ethic. So there's so much that is going to be lost in this current rush to erase history. And I'm not going to say erase black history, because as you know, if you've read any part of the book, black history is American history. People say, well, you do abstract art. How's that black art? I am black in America. It is black art. All art is informed by your lived experiences. So I really want you to pay attention and take the time on Instagram and other social media formats to look at artists who are coming from Jamaica, from Haiti, from Grenada, from all aspects and parts of Africa. That's number one. Number two, would you hold this for me, brother?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm going to project like I was doing my radio shows back in the day. As I said, I'm originally from Jamaica, and I just want to read this first paragraph for those of you who haven't had the book, Shifting Time. Claire Scarborough is right there. my dear friend who put this together with me. Also want to shout out to Jim Petrucci and Claudia Volpe. Jim is in the back. There he is. Jim and I go back 30-something years, and we first worked with Claire for the book Barbara Bullock's. Is Barbara?
Right there.
Barbara! Hey, darling. What was that? Chasing After, what was the title? Chasing After Spirits, right. And Jim had reached out to me when I was collecting, starting the collection, and he'd said, you know, what about this opportunity to work with Barbara? What should I do? And I said, say yes and sign the check. And Claire did an amazing job, so when she reached out to put together this book, what's that term you gave me today in the car? I forgot. Co-conceived. I was saying to Claire, I don't want to do something wrong by saying it was my idea or your idea. And she said, no, it was a co-conceived idea. And it really was a marriage, a nexus of mutual interest. Some of it came off from the Sugar and Water series during COVID. But to circle back around, I just wanted to read this first very short paragraph, because as a Jamaican American, I remember going through Lafayette College, being hit with the reality of not so much whiteness versus blackness, but of class, of a certain group of people who could do anything and succeed, and the rest of us who had to work hard, and there was no guarantee. And I think it's not a terrible thing to say that maybe secretly, deep down, I wanted to find some moment in time where things could be equal. And I never thought I would see that. And I think COVID for me, and I think for a lot of us, not just me, this is not a black thing, this is just how it was. As someone said earlier, some people, Syd went into her gardens and had her mother pins as a guardian to keep her through that. Adama was performing and building, capes in the park and having that continuity to our ancestral legacy. Dr. Brantley here was in his studio just generating and taking care of Sandy. So again, we're not a monolith, so we're not going to talk about how we all did the same thing and how there was this through line of African American culture that all had us moving our heads the same way. It didn't work like that. So for me, as a Jamaican American, I just wanted to say, and also someone with a physical deformity, one of the things that I always was struggling for was to try to find equal footing with everybody else, which you couldn't in the culture because of race, class structure, all these other things. And COVID for me was this weird, and again, for a lot of us, was this weird moment, right, folks, when you realize that the entire world was on the same page. I'm sorry, but that really, the French use the word arrêt. It stopped me. All great art should arrest you. Every piece of art that you like, no one should tell you it's good or bad. If it stops you in your tracks and makes you forget your name, it's a good piece of art for you. And COVID did that for me. It made me forget my name. It made me forget what day it was. It made me forget anything. What do you mean I'm washing canned peas? What? And it's so easy in this culture to be part of a group that we transcend it together. We sort of go, oh, that was a trauma, but it's Thursday now, let's move on. Well, it didn't work like that. And for someone who came from my cultural background, who had to adopt African American culture, when I was at my darkest moments in college, my sister called me up once and she said, don't be too hard on yourself. You have to be adept at being a Jamaican. You have to know all the songs, the culture, who's, the murder rate, whatever. You have to know everything about African American culture because that's how you survive in America. You have to know everything about European culture because that is the measure of your intellect in this domain. And you also have to keep track of the fact that you are a physically disabled person and all that. So when my sisters sort of parsed that out to me and said, you have to be a master at all of these at all times, do not compare yourself with someone who only has to master one thing. Circling back to COVID, I felt that moment when I realized that something had changed, that there was no going back. And I mean that. There will be no going back to normal. We're here now without masks because some people made some good decisions. We've got brilliant people. We've got vaccines and so forth. But business is still struggling to go back to normal, and it's given us a chance to really question what normal was. So as an artist, I said here in my opening statement, I remember the moment when I realized that everything was about to change, when COVID-19 became an omnipresent reality. And this is true. I was sitting down having my dinner, and the NBA canceled a midweek game. You guys remember that?
Yep.
We were watching an NBA game, and they cleared the arena. Now, I don't know if you've been paying attention to what it means to live in America, but when the dollar moves, something's happened. And to me, if the virus was significant enough to derail the multi-billion-dollar sports industry, shit just got real. And more ominously, the world began to shut down in sequence as panic buying, hoarding, lockdown, sanitizing of purchased foods, and quote-unquote social distancing became necessary realities. Now, Brother James, thank you for holding that, talked about the fact that, social distancing for a lot of us artists wasn't that strange at all. I mean, people like to look at the nouns on the wall. There they are, paintings about this or that. But fundamentally, what we remember different than you is, for us, art is a verb. We're always remembering the act of doing it. You talked about the cape. You talked about the flowers. You know what I mean? The process is king to us. So that's the difference between us who make it and you who see it. Whenever I see a piece of art, if I'm looking at one of Jaslyn's pieces online, yes, I called you out. The first thing I'm thinking of is not whether or not it's critically great or will go down in the annals of American history. I'm starting to deconstruct it. So COVID for me was a process of deconstructing. Now, I was fortunate enough to be working with Jim for, I don't know how many years then, 7 years. And we were also fortunate enough that as Claudia Volpe came on board, she and I began working on this concept I had pitched to Jim, which was sugar and water. Now, sorry, I said that like an American. Let me say it like a Jamaican. Sugar and water. Sugar and water, like America's red juice, right? African Americans, you go to every picnic, there's some red juice. In Jamaica, Kool-Aid, red juice. In Jamaica, we always had sugar and water. Like, there was no idea of, like, maybe we could squeeze lemons. We had lemons everywhere. Sugar and water was basically something that could sustain you. It wasn't necessarily healthy. Brown sugar and water. It's great. We loved it as kids. So Jim gave us a go-ahead, and we were able to do sugar and water during COVID. And it was a series of interviews, which, as Dama said, it gave us an opportunity to take this new technology, Zoom, and begin to speak with each other. Now, you were there, Syd was there. We didn't want you there, sorry. But we were able to start a dialogue between artists around the country, and something interesting happened, and that is we realized that as amazing as things were prior to COVID, as terrifying as COVID was on a world stage with trucks full of bodies and so forth, we had this opportunity to connect and create community that we never did before, ever. A simple tool, Zoom, in a Jetsonian kind of way, we were able to have incredible discourse and film it, and some of the transcriptions are in the book, and it was sustenance, right? It really helped us not listen to the noise of our own wheels, which is the best way I can describe what it means to be an artist. The last two things I want to say before I hand it over to Lewis, let me just move this out of the way here. Two things that someone said earlier about African American culture, but American culture at large, because I don't want to speak in terms of segregation. I want to speak in terms of common experiences, because COVID really, it showed us that the emperor had no clothes. It showed us that we were all scared of the same thing. It showed us that race was an interesting concept, but COVID didn't care. But it was especially hard for us as people of color because it was a particularly violent time. And we also, for the first time, saw the entire world rise up in disgust over the act of the murder of someone named George Floyd, bless his soul. So there were many vectors that were changing and shifting our world. I found it difficult to go in my studio and mix the perfect frequency of blue. I felt I was abandoning the moment. I felt it was my job, not to speak of the past or the future, but to absorb and be a witness in church of what was happening in the world, so that in the future I could convert that to art. So for me, the creative process of COVID meant seriously getting up every day, having my cup of coffee, washing my groceries, whatever I had to do, putting on my mask, and I'd go for a walk for about 5 miles along the Delaware River. And I'd bring my camera, and I would say to myself, somewhere along the walk is something so compelling that it will arrest you. Take that photograph and put it on Instagram. So as I was saying to Adama before, Instagram, the technology that was a part of our day, allowed me to put up an image almost every day. I didn't care how many likes, because as a Jamaican musician, Chronic says, I do it for the love, I don't do it for the likes. So I just put it up there, but it allowed me to remind myself that I was an artist, that I was part of a larger community, that I could see what Syd was doing, that I could see what Jerome was doing, that I could see everything else, and it gave me comfort in community, not just black community, but the entire world. It was fantastic to know that somebody could sit in a cave in Turkey and liking something I saw walking along the Delaware. It made me feel connected.
Thank you all, each of you have brought so much to this discussion. I'd like to ask you to comment on, a lot of you talked about practice, and the other side of being an artist is the business, and how has the fact of COVID affected your relationship with the art world, and how you complete the circuit that your work begins. The work is, from my perspective, not fulfilled until it has an audience and is seen and is looked at. And that's changed. It's changed for people who like to look at work from my side of the table. Can you talk about how it's changed your relationship to getting your work into the world?
I'll respond to that. I was able to make more connections during that time, only because technology via virtual exhibitions, Zoom conversations, being on panels, access to so many different kinds of outlets and venues that were just a click away. And so I felt more empowered, I guess, in terms of taking that aspect of my practice, if you will. I have a friend who says, I no longer practice, I'm at this. So that use of that term practice is always kind of funny for us, because at this stage, I'm not practicing. So that whole idea of being able to make connections and far and wide, and I guess it has actually been very beneficial, because so many new things have come my way that I wonder if they would have come my way had I not been so connected. I did become more savvy about how I could use the technology and access and posting things and just finding out what was going on and where. So there was I think I was illuminated by all of that. So I really think that it was, there were advantages to that time period for me.
Yeah, relating to that, to me, the commercial side of art is a necessary evil. I think artists sometimes are too drawn to that side of their profession, of their craft. I could care less. I had a will in the beginning, and I still do. It's like a bulldog. I bite and I don't let go. You know, I'm like a crocodile. If I decide I'm going to do something, I do it regardless of the consequence. And I still have that. So in terms of, I tell young artists all the time, is that marry a school teacher with benefits. Get a city job. Learn how to support yourself. No one promised us anything. I don't expect anything. I'll do it regardless. So it's something that's in my DNA, and it'll be there forever. So I feel quite comfortable. I've been very fortunate. I've been, blessed with sales and collections. I tell young artists again all the time, there's only two things that are important: documentation, and collections. That other stuff will come and go. But those two things are very, very important. So we continue on with beating that nail. Keep hitting that nail. Stay in the moment. Thank you.
Tom?
Yeah, I would say that the opportunity to connect was really interesting. I taught a class in The Hague, which I probably wouldn't have done, you know, and it was interesting, even just teaching for me was really, I taught 3 classes, one at Columbia, this is when I was adjunct, so I had one class at Columbia University, one class at in Bloomfield College, and then one in The Hague. And it was just interesting to connect with these people every week, 3 completely different situations going on. And then also, like you said, so many people reached out in terms of either collections or, you know, we want you to do this talk and that talk. So I felt like I had this full schedule in my living room, you know, between me and my son. We'll be like, okay, I'm gonna be in this room, you'll be in that room, you know, and it was kind of like you were connecting so much, giving these talks and, yeah, so it definitely did open up a bunch of doors, and yeah, and again, the work going places that I haven't been before that I would like to go to as well, you know, so yeah, so it was a really interesting time in that regard.
Very quickly, I said earlier that I felt a sense of, I would imagine, Catholic guilt at sort of mixing paint and convincing myself that taping this corner was really great. Then I'd go home and watch something I can only describe as obscene in terms of the relationship between the leadership at the time and what was happening to people, the fact that black and brown people were dying disproportionately. Again, there was an aftershock that made it really hard to do. But that being said, I still made work. And as far as exhibiting, I didn't go out to try to secure gallery exhibitions, Lewis, but as Adama was saying, as everyone got more accustomed or acclimated to the methods of reaching out, communicating, and mining artists, in a way, once everybody sort of made the 90-degree turn and said, oh, we can have a Zoom call with you about it, and if we have a show, we don't have to have people here, we could walk through and do a virtual tour, and all of a sudden I was able to see my friends' works, and then they were doing sales and so forth and so on. But I also wanted to just touch base on something else that we sort of touched a little bit, but when I was going out and collecting, and I'll call his name, Philandus Thames, you know, there he was at a studio in Yale, and I remember pulling up, and, you know, we didn't know the protocol, you know? I mean, there was a time where you could kill someone, or someone could kill you. So it was really weird to create the bonds that helped foster the kind of sequence that allowed for exhibitions and so forth. So eventually I got there, we said hello, we stayed 10 feet apart, and like some sort of, you know, crazy 5-minute movie, over an hour or so we were closer to closer, and then we were hugging, then we were laughing, then we couldn't get, you know, because there was sort of this desperate desire to touch someone and laugh and have a communication and go, oh my God, why aren't we brothers? And, you know, and I got a lovely piece for the collection and so forth. And then all of a sudden, he would reach out, give me a phone call and say, hey, I'm doing this thing. Here's an opportunity to do another show. So again, back to the idea of not just African-American culture, but us in particular, this idea of doing the most with the least. COVID put us in a very, very crazy, unprecedented chokehold, and I felt that overall, especially people of color, felt that this was, as you said, a challenge, but it was also where we always were. We just sort of said, okay, well, let's pounce, let's move it, and it was unexpected for me, you know, to realize that to now, this is happening because of COVID. We are here because of this book, because of the things we're talking about. This is not a theoretical statement. That book is full of 72 people, including Julie Mayretu, who we just, you know, joked and said, hey, let's reach out to her. I saw her show at Whitney 3 times, and she's like, yeah, I'd like to be in the book. I have to think that part of that ability, Lewis, to connect in ways that are the same but also higher came about as a function of being able to reconfigure the trauma and the strangeness that COVID gave us and create a new world that allowed for different kinds of opportunity.
Yeah, I think there are definitely digital haves and have-nots in this process. When James was talking about that he was committed to the work, I think my question really is, I value and honor that, but I also have a side of me that says, if James was given the resources to just do his work, what would that body of work look like, as opposed to James living the life that this society gives him, which is where you do your work after you've done your job. Yeah. And that for so many of people that we think of as great artists, their production was so limited because they had to make a living. And that it's that form of equity that is a concern.
Yeah, you want to talk about?
What you talking about, Willis?
I wouldn't trade a moment, a second. I think that the value of what I did with those children so enriched my life. I can't imagine doing anything else. Of course, I could have produced more art, more paintings. I'm doing that now. I've been doing that for 25 years. That's how long I've been retired. Most of us look at our lives in segments, and we have a vocation and we have an avocation, and we do this to do that. I never stopped. The line is continuing. And so I made some serious art back in those days. So I wouldn't change a thing, Louis. But that is an interesting position. That is an interesting position.
I'd like to add that we have to understand that our lives are a composite, that it isn't just that you're an artist. I mean, as humans, we are privileged to have that insight that allows us to be artists, but we also are mothers, we're fathers, we're sisters, we're neighbors, and all of that requires living a life that engages all of those different aspects of it. So it's always interesting to me when someone bemoans the fact that they have to sometimes divide their time, and that they may feel as if they are being deprived. And I think that being able to draw on those other things, you are going to make the art that you're going to make. Your circumstances are going to define that. And to feel as if you are somehow being unjustly denied, look at it from above. You are the sum of your parts, the sum of your experiences, and I need those other parts to make the art.
Yeah, I'll be giving a thank you, Syd. I couldn't agree more, and I just looked at this. I'm giving a talk at Lafayette College on Thursday about black art, black identity, and black expression. So let me read the first thing I'm going to say to them, what Syd just said, which is, my students bemoaned the fact that I kept repeating this like some kind of crazy mantra, but art is input. Let me say that again. Art is input. I'm not talking about painting. I'm talking about music, writing. Everything is a function of input. So what we're really talking about, in my humble opinion, is that how did COVID affect input? That's the question. I told you that it freaked me out. I wanted to witness whatever. I didn't stop making art. The things that traumatized me then are now appearing in the work I'm making now because I was collecting them. I was writing. I was my notes on my phone is a jumble of ideas and quotes for future painting. So I never felt that I left myself outside of the game because I wasn't making art. I turned the switch to input, since I'd always believed that. You can't be creative if you don't know how to process and translate lived, observed, or imagined experience. You cannot be creative. So, you know, this lecture I'm going to give is about black art, and I said, what is black art? I'm going to put forward that black art is like all art. It derives from what is unique about our own lived experiences. Blacks in America are not a monolith. We're only that in name only. We navigate multiple levels of aligned and non-aligned experiences. Some of us exist in unimaginable circumstances, and what gloms on from those socio-political settings require the need for heroic representation or creating art forms that are as dense and claustrophobic as the lives we live. All of it is legitimate. There is no art pope. You know, there is none. And the thing that I've seen, every documentary I've seen of every artist, forget color or gender, when they reach a certain level of maturity, they say the same damn thing. When some idiot 30-year-old shows them and says, Mr. Johnson, can you tell us what the secret is to be a great artist and having a great career? Every time they look at them almost disparagingly and say, show up. Show up. Just show up. And it's the same in business, and it's the same in everything else. Nothing happens until you show up. Show up at the gym. Show up. Show up. So it's so nice that our culture likes to think of us as sort of these wizards with this magical ability called talent. It's bullshit. Talent is bullshit. When I taught, I had an equation on the board. It said talent equals dedication plus will, drew a line over time. Tiger Woods was hitting putts when he was 3. Kobe Bryant did 3,000 shots from around. Steph Curry makes a gazillion shots, so that you have to think about it. Why is that different for artists? It's the same for scientists. We have a culture where we think that the artist is, our function is decorative. I got news for you. The way you're dressed right now is because some artistic creative director told you that that fits you and you bought it. Okay? We are the only culture that is like dominating the world forever in terms of the power of aesthetics. I mean, we live in America, people. Come on, image is king. And if image is king and generating billions of dollars, why is it that we're still being relegated to this realm of, so the spirit moves you and you're kind of talented, you make a cape in the park? No. What makes us distinct, what made COVID strange, was when time shifted, we had to go, hang on a minute. This ain't my father's time. This ain't my mother's time. This ain't future time. This is crazy now. How do we convert this into something that years from now will have a level of authenticity? Doesn't mean you change what you do. It means you tune into something and you create something that years later has resonance. That's why when you listen to music from when you were 20, you cry, because it was good then. Stevie Wonder was good then, he's good now. And that's what we all need to do. Stop worrying about what genre, what ism, whether Syd's in her garden with the mother pins or not. None of that matters. Dama's video, Cleanse, is one of my favorite, the favorite art video of my life that woman has made there. And it is just beautiful because it talks about that notion, amongst other things, of transitioning from one state to the other and being the author of that transitioning. And that's why I love the video. It's not about it being about a woman or this or that. It's about something that is translatable for everyone. And I think we ought to really move forward as a nation and remember that the experiences we had with COVID, when time shifted, we all own. They're ours.
I wanted to also just make this point and put this out there. If anyone has any doubt about how critical art makers and art and those of us who are creative and insightful and perceptive and are willing to record that and give it some kind of physical form, ask yourself the question, when you have a government that suddenly becomes fascist, that suddenly becomes tyrannical, which suddenly becomes, not suddenly, gradually, as in this case, who do they seek out first to silence?
Silence, indeed.
Who gets thrown under the bus first? Why? Because they understand that if you have that many voices, those kinds of voices, making the points, giving them physical presence, making objects, making images, making films. This is something they can't control. So this whole notion of us as being these lightweight, peripheral, on the margins part of society is belied by the fact that when those folks come into power, they come for us first.
Like the Nazis in World War II, what did they steal? They took the art. They invaded Africa. What did they take? Took the art. Power is in our expression of ourselves, regardless of where we are as humans. It is power, and it's recognized as that. I think let's talk about the fashion industry. Artists are in every endeavor of our culture. You can't put your finger on anything that an artist has something that had to do with, they're in there. The cars, the clothes, the houses, the bridges. It's in everything. It's the way we display food, and it's art. That's why I love cooking. It has something to do with the sight, the smell, and the taste. It's all there. It's just a wonderful culinary art. I quoted someone, a writer, and it's, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or festers like a sore on and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it's just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Langston. So this is a call to arms that don't deny those that want to create. It's so important for our culture. The first things that are taken from our schools is art. The books are being desecrated in parts of the country that's very concerning. Don't start the Fahrenheit 451 again when we're burning books. It's very important that we keep artists alive. Art saves lives.
No, who said fear no art?
Fear no art, yeah.
We also fear what we don't understand.
Yeah.
If anybody in the audience has a question, we can take a few questions. Come up and speak into the microphone.
If you dare.
If you dare. Any questions?
Or just talk.
We'll just stand.
We have,
Just stand up.
Stand up.
We can hear.
Yeah, I just have a little comment about space, when everybody was talking about space.
That's Martina.
It is. Hey, Martina.
Hello, everybody. It really touched me because as a teacher, I read a book to my class called Evan's Corner. And, must be over 30 years old. But this little boy lived in the projects, and he didn't have any space for himself. But his mother created a corner in her small apartment for him. And she said, Evan, this corner is just for you and just for your things. So I read that to my class to let them know that no matter where they live, they can create some space. Because like you all said, space is very important. But no matter where you live, if you have some support, you can get someone to help you, or you create on your own space. So I thought that was very touching what you all reinforced the idea of spatial relationships.
Thank you. Jim?
Jim?
I have a question for you, Lewis, and then maybe the artist can pick up on that. And I mentioned to you before, your comments in your forward about the artist as scouts really struck me, because I always think of art as looking backwards with experiences, not experiences that are yet to unfold. And could you just address that a little bit, and maybe just my comments?
Well, I guess I see what they're doing is sort of, if culture is a car, they provide the headlights, and you have to have somebody who's looking, who's processing, and digesting that and giving you something that is a framework. I said today, along the same line, you hear so many people talking about getting back to normal. We're not going back. It's a one-way ride. If you think you're going back, we're never going to get there. We're going somewhere, and it may be wonderful, it may be horrible, but it's not going to be back. And I think artists are part of defining what that next space, what that next answer will be.
But Lewis, you just defined what I define artists or creativity to my students. And I would say to them, if you know where you're going, you've already been there, right? And I think the other thing too is that culture at large thinks they wait, like in the socio-political sense, they want one leader. They want a king or a Malcolm X. They want one person to lead us everywhere. That's not how it goes. Many generals win the war. Not all of them are at the same level, but if each of us making art is telling the truth about our relationship to the time, to our gender, to our history, to our sensibilities, right or wrong, then all those images later in time come together to create a quite accurate composite of what it meant and felt like to be human. It is our job to tell the truth about our experiences. It is not our job to please people or match your couch. It's our job to say things that are difficult to digest, offensive, funny, satirical, grotesque. It is our job. We can't live in a culture where each of those descriptives I just say are like permeate or through lines through the fabric of the culture. And somehow as artists we're supposed to go and do what? Portraits of apples? What? The artistic impulse is just that. It's literally, as Robert Farris Thompson describes, it's a flash of the spirit. It makes no sense. When I talked about going to my studio and not being able to make blue, it doesn't mean I couldn't do it. That's one of the worst, most difficult things about being an artist, is knowing you can walk in any day, do something and sell it, and choosing not to. Because you'd rather do what Lewis is saying. You'd rather try to find a path about saying something you haven't said before. It is a very difficult thing to go into your studio or your corner, Martina, and say, I'm going to dedicate this day in that direction. I have all the information in my head, and in order to get there, I'm going to have to forget everything I know so I can discover something. That is a very difficult thing to do, and that's why we don't have more artists. There's a ton of people who are talented, but to stand in your studio alone and put down the guardrails and take everything that's come into you and transfer that into something that you're not even sure makes sense on that Wednesday is hard to go back to your home or wife, children, and go, what'd you do today? I'm not sure, but I think it's good. You know? And then other people look at it as a noun and go, damn, that's so profound. And they expect you to go, yeah, I meant that. You meant it because you did it, but you didn't mean it because you thought that was going to be the defining form of the time. I think that more people need to understand that one of the things that why we don't have more artists than we do is it's risky as hell. It's really, really risky. And you don't know. As a teacher, I went from grading my students' work as they did it to waiting till the end of the term because the reality was I didn't know what it looked like till 3 months later. And I would sit down with them, put all their works up on the wall and go, now, what the hell's going on here? And we could see patterns. Well, why don't I do the same thing in my studio? It doesn't mean I'm less than, it doesn't mean we're, any different. It just means that we have accepted power within the space of not knowing.
I wanted to, Naomi, you have a question. Go ahead. Okay. This probably dovetails onto what Berrisford is saying. I have been saying this to students for many decades, and it came to me from someone else. And it's the phrase, notice what you notice. Yes. And that's really, really key to moving anyone forward who thinks about just their experience and just being visual or tactile, is to not to disregard the things that you notice, because that's where new art comes from. That's where new perceptions, or that's what the foundation of making and seeing and communicating comes from, is to validate what you have noticed. And you will see patterns over time of things repeating themselves over the decades, and just the idea that you are valuing what you notice, not what somebody else told you to notice, not what somebody else says is important. It's what you notice, because now we're getting at the whole essence of human experience. Your experience, what you notice, what you see as something that is something that detonates something in your soul to get it moving. That's what you have to acknowledge, take note of, make records of, and ultimately, if you get the opportunity, make art.
And a recognition that if you're in a crowd, if you're not in the front, the view is always the same.
I was going to say that the art world is partially to blame. To the audience gathered here today, again, thank you. May I please, implore you to pick up what Syd just said. It sounds too simple to be powerful, but it really is. Because you know the maxim. I don't know much about art, but I like this. It's a way of backing into something you noticed.
Like pornography.
Why back in? Like, why back into what you noticed? You noticed it. So rather than taking that as a cover for shame over not being, profound in your observation of something in anyone else's work, why not just go with what you notice and say to your friend, this is what I noticed. I was just at the Nick Cave exhibition at the Guggenheim, which was just a pale imitation of what it was like at the MCA in Chicago. Nonetheless, I was walking there. A couple came by, two women, two partners, and I just looked at one of the pieces where there was a hand holding some plastic flowers and a mirror, an oval mirror, and the shadow was cascading down. And I'm standing there, drool on the corner of my mouth going, damn, look how that shadow interacts with the, and one of the lovers said to the other one, what are we doing here? Like, what am I supposed to see looking at this? And her partner could see, first she kind of looked like, I'm with you, and then she said, but what am I looking at? What am I supposed to be seeing and everything? And being a teacher and being a nosy busybody, I was by myself with my friends had walked off, and I leaned over and I said, well, maybe if you look past the title and the names of things to what you actually see, then you could possibly see something. And her partner looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, well, that's a hand, and those are plastic flowers, and that's a shadow, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, yes. And I said, well, Robert Irving did this book, Seeing is Forgetting, the name of the thing you're looking at. So why don't you forget that you're looking at a hand, a black hand, flowers, a shadow at the Guggenheim, and just look at it in terms of how these forms interact. And her friend went, oh, and her partner hugged me for like 13 minutes. It's like, but you see, that wasn't profound. I wasn't saying, hi, I'm the art expert.
Right.
Nick Cave is important because he comes out of this tradition in Chicago. That's BS. People want to feel that they have a connection to something. What did we start talking about with COVID? It was losing connection, right? COVID it broke the tethers to things that weren't really that good. Not everything was great before COVID. It wasn't like Newt said, it was a normal there that we were surviving. And at the same time, to have all this socio-political unrest and upheaval, so we're both untethered, yet we're tethered to violence, but this, and leadership is failing us, and so it was a state of just feeling like you're magnetized, but you can't connect to something. Am I lying? Didn't we all feel that way? It wasn't that fantastic? Wasn't that amazing when time shifted? Well, that's what this book is about. Each person in this book, each artist in this book, it's their words, their rant, their observation, their unwillingness to talk about the theory about their work, their descriptives. It's not me and Claire sitting on a seat and coming up with some interesting, esoteric statement about what Adama Delphine is saying. I put the book together. I read all the essays with Claire, and I still found myself, after talking to Jim one night, sitting in my bed at 2 in the morning going, just one more, just one more, just one more, just one more. And that, to me, is one of the greatest things about this project. These people like Lewis, these people here have guided me since I was in my 20s, I was a pup. So this Philadelphia art scene that's always had to take a back seat to New York, but has always been producing remarkable work, that has always had great supporters and a great community. We're looking at some of the kings and queens of that in this room. It's not a small thing to have an opportunity to gather those people together, those who are extremely well established, those who are just going, and put them in the book to talk about our common humanity and an unprecedented time, and how we allow that input to change us, enhance us, project us forward, or really freeze us in place so that we begin to notice, what did you say? What we notice. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Come on, Richard.
I'd just like to commend Lewis and you all for being here. I'm Richard Watson, and I'd just like to say I love all of you guys. This is my family. You are my family. I lost relatives during COVID, and at the same time, I had dedicated my life to those people, and COVID gave me a break because it gave me something, and it took something away from me because I was a caregiver, and I was day and night going from my house to a relative's house to take care, go to work, go by there in the evening, go home and do my work. So I think that the whole idea of COVID being a relief from the stress of all that was a bittersweet kind of occurrence in my life, and so it was in most people's lives. But from a creative standpoint, that comes from within. It didn't come from the incursion with COVID or the pandemic. I think we consume everything around us and don't give it a name, but we sort of like digest all of that, and then we expunge that through our creative art form, which has no name to us because that's a part of our life. You know, we consume, we digest, we regurgitate, and hopefully if we put a name on it, somebody will say, oh, that's what I'm looking for. But in the process of doing art, there's no intended output to say that when I do this, this is going to be in this category or it's going to be nice. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter who says she's already a great artist. I mean, she could care less. She could care less about my work. And so this is true, honest God. This is the truth that I've learned about self-evaluation and self-validating. We have to feel good about life in general, in its physical form, and then we have to take that as substance for us to use to export something from our spiritual form. So we are all on a level of intention with a hope and aspiration that it will connect with something outside of our own bodies. So these guys, like women, I mean, all of us are guys. We call it like, hey guys, you know, hey, you guys are great. But man, it's just beautiful being here. This is the most wonderful time to be in life, period. So you all, look at that, I can't call you by name. I just know you, you know. I just love us being here like that. And thanking Lewis for being the moderator, and James is my brother. We could tell you stories all day. And Delphine, yeah. And all of you guys, peace. Oh, ma'am.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. One more comment.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of the artists seated at the panel and to all the artists in the room.
Yes.
I have been following you guys my entire life. I feel like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm Naomi Nelson, and I'm a humble researcher that has been following the artwork of these guys for all of my adult life, and that is not a long story. And I wanted to say that, one, thank you, because what you do makes a difference. And that you remained in Philadelphia made a difference. And so we need you to continue working here. But also, I wanted to say that our next generation of young artists are in a very fragile position. The impact of COVID on our young people has been tremendous. There is a level of mental instability that comes with trying to be an artist, trying to work alone in the midst of COVID. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask is, one, continue to do your good work because you are the role models for them, but also your hands touch them and inspire them through your teaching. But the question is, how do you foresee the future for this fragile generation of young artists when all of the anchors that were in place when you were them are no longer in place, and there's no going back? And so I often wonder, what will their future look like? What is it that will keep them anchored to continue and stay on this path?
I can respond to that. It's like everything else, you're dealt a hand, and you have to play that hand. And
So those of these young people who are at their core artists, that's going to manifest itself one way or the other. The fact that it will not be lubricated in the same ways that maybe my journey was lubricated, they will have their obstacles. I mean, the idea that art will continue is something that it's a sustaining thing. There will be art, and there will be people making it. As to advising and counseling, I had my demons that could have stopped me in my tracks. There were circumstances that had to do with economics, all of these kinds of things that could have stopped me in my tracks. So I can only say I'm not going to worry about them. They're gonna have to play the hand they're dealt. And if they're gonna be artists, they're gonna make their art. And if not, then that's a loss for the culture, but it is the reality of it. I mean, there's nothing guaranteed, there's no formula, there's no prescriptions, there's nothing that says, well, we need our art, yeah, and maybe we won't have as many, but I guess it's the pragmatist, the fatalist in me that just says we're gonna get the art we're gonna get.
You're also humans.
Yeah. Right, and we're gonna get the art.
I'm not worried about that at
Yeah,
all. I
yeah,
think
no.
that they'll survive. I think that the shoulders that they'll stand on are similar to the shoulders we stood on.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll find their way, as one would say, art finds a way regardless. So I'm not that concerned about the future. I think with the digital age, I'm looking at these young kids and how they're manipulating colors through computers and patterns, and it's unlike anything that I grew up with. It's a new age, and I think the doors are wide open for that kind of creativity. And also the old stuff is still with us. I mean, the acrylics, the pencils,
We haven't
Yeah.
lost.
oil paint, right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll be quick. Paul Simon said every generation sends a hero up the pop charts.
Yep. And also as a mother of young artists, I'm not worried at all because I feel like just as we are humans, these experiences shape us and art comes, right? So I think we're in good hands, and yeah, I'm actually excited about what they're going to do.